Before age 15, one star had already been to rehab twice, attempted legal emancipation, and faced national headlines about drug use. Fame came early. The fallout came even faster. Bobby Driscoll falls. The story opens on a high note. Bobby Driscoll becomes the Disney kid almost every child dreams of being. Born in 1937 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, he starts acting before most kids learn long division. He lands roles in Song of the South, So Dear to My Heart, and the thriller The Window. By 1950, he holds an Academy Juvenile Award for his work in those films. In 1953, he becomes the voice and live-action model for Peter Pan. At this point, he has studio protection, steady work, and national fame. Then, the shift begins. As he moves into his teens, he develops severe acne. Makeup artists work overtime to hide it during television appearances. Studio executives start to see him differently. The image of the perfect young hero no longer fits, and they look for new faces who match the brand. In 1953, shortly after Peter Pan is released, Disney ends his long-term contract early. Reports at the time cite his changing appearance and puberty as the reason. Life outside the studio offers no safety net. His parents remove him from the Hollywood Professional School and place him in a regular high school in West Los Angeles. Instead of praise, he finds ridicule. Classmates tease him for being a former Disney star. He struggles to adjust, and his grades drop. Later accounts describe him trying to fit in, getting rejected, then acting tough while feeling isolated. During this period, he begins spending time with students who are using drugs. He joins them. By age 17, he is using narcotics, including heroin. Police records show his first arrest in 1956 for marijuana possession, though the charge is dismissed. Acting work becomes rare. He picks up small television roles, but major film offers disappear. Casting directors see his problems first and his talent second. In 1961, a California court sends him to the State Narcotic Rehabilitation Facility at Chino. He completes treatment but struggles to rebuild his career. The industry has moved on. He drifts to New York, spending time around the art scene, often broke and in poor health. His living conditions decline, and he stays in cheap housing in the East Village. Rusty Hamer's collapse. It starts with a paycheck. Rusty Hammer becomes one of the highest-paid child actors on television in the 1950s. He plays Rusty Williams on Make Room for Daddy, later known as The Danny Thomas Show. The series runs from 1953 to 1964, and he appears in more than 300 episodes. Viewers see him as quick, funny, and confident on camera. He receives fan mail from across the country, and the show gives him national recognition before he reaches high school. Behind that success, his life is tied to studio schedules. Tutors handle his schooling on set. Most of his income goes into accounts controlled by adults, leaving him with limited access. The focus stays on production, not education or career planning. When the series ends in 1964, his acting identity is solid, but the industry has no plan for what comes next. The shift hits fast. Casting directors do not see him as a leading teen actor. His voice changes, his look changes, and producers move toward new faces. He auditions, gets polite rejections, and watches his career stall. He works on short-lived projects, including the 1970 spin-off Make Room for Granddaddy, but it is canceled after one season. With that cancellation, his connection to Hollywood slips away. The financial impact follows. Without steady work, he returns home. He lives with family members for long periods. Reports from friends describe him taking jobs far from the spotlight, including restaurant work in Louisiana. The transition from national TV star to hourly employee is difficult. Depression grows during the 1980s. Former co-stars later recall that he struggles with mood swings and financial stress. Offers for acting roles do not appear. Public attention fades. On the 18th of January, 1990, at age 42, he takes his own life in his home. Patty Duke controlled. His troubles start while the cameras are still kind. Born Anna Marie Duke in New York City in 1946, she is pushed into acting by her parents before age 10. By the late 1950s, she is working on live television and stage. At 8, Her parents turn legal and practical control of her career over to her managers, John and Ethel Ross. They change her name to Patty Duke, move her into their apartment, and tightly manage her food, clothes, and schedule. Most of her income goes through them. Her breakthrough arrives in 1959 with the Broadway play The Miracle Worker. She plays Helen Keller 8 times a week. In 1962, the film version brings her the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress at 16, at that time the youngest performer to win in a competitive acting category. Right after that, she leads The Patty Duke Show on television from 1963 to 1966, playing 2 cousins in a split-screen format. To the audience, she looks like the model teen star, steady and charming. Inside the Ross household, her own account is very different. In later interviews and in her 1987 autobiography, Call Me Anna, she describes verbal and physical abuse, financial control, and early exposure to prescription pills. She says they gave her stimulants to keep her working and sleeping pills to crash between jobs. Her weight drops. She develops severe anxiety and mood swings. By the late 1960s, the problems are public. After The Patty Duke Show ends, she makes films like Valley of the Dolls and Me, Natalie, but she also starts drinking heavily. In 1967, she tries to take her own life and spends time in psychiatric care. A few years later, she has another serious mental health crisis while still working. Paul Peterson fights back. Another kid grows up in a perfect TV living room. Paul Peterson is born in Glendale, California in 1945. At 10, he briefly joins the original Mickey Mouse Club. That job ends quickly, but he keeps working and lands film roles, including a part in Houseboat in 1958. The same year, he is cast as Jeff Stone, the son on The Donna Reed Show. The series runs from 1958 to 1966, and he appears in all 8 seasons. Television turns him into a teen idol. While the show is on the air, record labels sign him. In the early 1960s, he releases singles like She Can't Find Her Keys and My Dad. My Dad climbs into the top 10 on the Billboard chart, and he sings it on the show to his on-screen father. Fan clubs form. Magazine covers treat him as one of the main faces of safe, clean American youth. The end of the series brings a hard reset. Once The Donna Reed Show finishes in 1966, he finds that most casting directors see him only as Jeff Stone. He gets parts in films and guest spots on series, but nothing with the same weight. Work slows down. Interviews later describe that period as a long struggle with typecasting and uncertainty. Like many former child actors, he has to figure out who he is without a weekly network slot. Instead of chasing fame at any cost, he leaves the center of the business. He goes back to school, studies literature, and builds a second career as a writer. In the 1970s, he publishes adventure novels and a memoir called Walt, Mickey, and Me, which deals with his time as a young performer. As he gets older, he hears more stories about other former child actors who are broke, addicted, or facing serious mental health problems. By around 1990, he decides that talking about the pattern is not enough. He creates a nonprofit group, A Minor Consideration, to support current and former child performers. Anissa Jones and the Crash. On a late August morning in 1976, a teenager is found unresponsive in a bedroom in Oceanside, California. The name on the report is Mary Anissa Jones. She is 18, and police note that she had been at an all-night gathering with friends. The coroner will later write that she died from combined drug intoxication. Her story begins far from the beach. Anissa is born in West Lafayette, Indiana in 1958. Her family moves to California when she is still young. By grade school, she is doing television commercials. At 8, she is cast as Buffy Davis on the CBS sitcom Family Affair. The show premieres in 1966. She becomes known for her pigtails, her big eyes, and the doll she carries on screen. For 5 seasons, she works long hours balancing school with taping. When the series ends in 1971, the studio attention drops away. Casting agents do not line up with strong new roles. She has a small part in an Elvis Presley film and a few guest spots, then the offers slow. At the same time, Her parents' marriage breaks apart. Court records show a long custody fight and tension inside the home. In 1974, her father dies of heart disease. By her mid-teens, she has stopped acting completely. A different life takes shape. She goes back to regular high school. Friends there see her as a former TV star who now works in local jobs to earn money. Reports from the time mention work at a clothing store and a donut shop. She waits for the trust fund from her family affair earnings, which she cannot access until she turns 18. On her 18th birthday, she gains control of the money. Estimates put the total in cash and bonds well above $100,000 for that year. The night before her death, she goes to a gathering at a house in Oceanside. The next morning, she is found on a bedroom floor and cannot be revived. Mackenzie Phillips breaks down. The workday looks normal at first. Cast and crew for the sitcom One Day at a Time gather on a soundstage in the mid-1970s. Among them is teenager Mackenzie Phillips, who plays Julie Cooper. She has already done American Graffiti, filmed when she is 12. That movie, set in cruising streets and car culture, makes her a familiar face. The series pushes her into full TV stardom. Her childhood is tied to music and touring. She is born in 1959 in Alexandria, Virginia, the daughter of John Phillips from The Mamas and the Papas. As a child, she spends time around recording studios and adult parties. By the time One Day at a Time becomes a hit, she is earning serious money and fronting storylines about a young woman trying to grow up. Off-screen, her life is moving in a very different direction. Drug and alcohol use enter early. During the show's run, reports and later interviews describe her using cocaine and other substances in her teens. In 1977, she is arrested for disorderly conduct. People on the set start to notice that she arrives late, misses cues, and struggles with lines. Producers send her on a short break so she can seek treatment and then bring her back, hoping she will stay stable. The pattern does not hold. By 1980, her drug use has become severe enough that the production team removes her from the series. She goes into a treatment program. For a short period, she appears to be rebuilding. In 1981, the producers decide to give her another chance and invite her back to One Day at a Time. Her character returns, and the studio presents it as a positive step. The return is brief. She relapses into heavy cocaine use. In 1982, she collapses on the set. When she refuses to take a drug test, the producers let her go again and write her character out of the show. Gary Coleman under pressure. Spotlights can sit on a very fragile body. Gary Coleman is born in 1968 in Zion, Illinois, and adopted as an infant. Doctors diagnose a serious kidney disease called focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. He spends much of childhood in hospitals, has 2 kidney transplants, and needs regular dialysis. The condition stops his growth, leaving him under 5 feet tall as an adult with a childlike appearance that becomes part of his screen identity. Work starts early. In 1974, he appears in a Harris Bank commercial, then lands a role on the medical drama Medical Center. A 1977 pilot for a new Little Rascals catches the attention of television producers. In 1978, NBC casts him as Arnold Jackson on Different Strokes, the sitcom about 2 boys from Harlem adopted by a wealthy businessman. The show becomes a major hit, running 8 seasons, and his skeptical line, "What you talkin' 'bout, Willis?" becomes one of the most repeated phrases on television. Money follows fame. At the height of the series, reports place his pay at around $100,000 per episode. He wins multiple audience awards, including People's Choice Honors and Young Artist Recognition. On camera, he plays the confident, witty kid who always bounces back. Off camera, health problems continue, and long production days leave little space for a normal childhood. The finances do not match the public image. A trust fund holds the earnings meant to secure his future. When he approaches adulthood, he discovers the account contains far less than expected, around $220,000 instead of the several million he believes should be there. In 1989, he files a lawsuit against his parents and former business advisor, accusing them of mismanaging and taking his money. In 1993, a court awards him about $1.28 million, well below the total he earned as a child star. Public trouble grows. In 1998, he is charged with assault after punching a woman who asks for an autograph in a California mall. He says he felt harassed and cornered. A judge gives him a suspended jail sentence, anger management classes, and orders him to pay her medical bills. In May 2010, while living in Utah, he falls at home and strikes his head. Doctors diagnose a brain hemorrhage caused by an epidural hematoma. 2 days later, he dies at age 42. Dana Plato spirals down. Another face from the same sitcom follows a very different path. Dana Michelle Strain is born in 1964 in California and later takes the name Dana Plato. As a child, she works in commercials and small roles. Producers cast her as Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes when she is a young teen. The show premieres in 1978. She plays the wealthy, kind sister to Arnold and Willis and becomes one of the most visible teen actresses on television. Behind the scenes, substance use starts early. She later admits that during those years, she drinks alcohol, uses cannabis, and tries cocaine. At 14, she overdoses on prescription sedatives. Her personal life and career collide in the mid-1980s. In 1983, she moves in with guitarist Lanny Lambert. They marry in April 1984, and later that year she gives birth to a son, Tyler. When producers learn she is pregnant, the writers send her character off to Paris and remove her from the regular cast. Losing Different Strokes cuts off steady income and structure. Stress builds quickly. In early 1988, she separates from Lambert. During the same week, her mother dies from scleroderma. Grief, a failing marriage, and unstable work leave her vulnerable. She signs power of attorney to an accountant who later disappears with most of her remaining money, leaving her with less than $150,000. Legal trouble follows. In 1991, she walks into a Las Vegas video store with a pellet gun and demands cash. She leaves with about $164. The clerk calls police and says he was robbed by the actress who played Kimberly Drummond. She returns to the store minutes later and is arrested. A judge gives her 5 years of probation. In 1992, she is arrested again for forging a prescription for Valium, leading to 30 days in jail and a court-ordered stay in a drug treatment program. By 1999, she is living in a motorhome with her fiancé, Robert Menchaca. On the 7th of May, she appears on The Howard Stern Show and claims she has been sober for more than 10 years. The next day, while visiting Menchaca's family in Moore, Oklahoma, she reports feeling unwell and takes prescription painkillers and a muscle relaxant. She lies down and never wakes up. Mackenzie Phillips reaches breaking point. The years after, her firing looks scattered on paper, but they show a clear downward trend. By the mid-1980s, Mackenzie Phillips is no longer a steady presence on television. Instead, she works with a later touring lineup of the Mamas and the Papas, joining her father, John Phillips, and other musicians on stage. Crowds remember the name, and promoters book shows based on nostalgia. The travel schedule is rough. Reports from that period describe missed rehearsals, canceled appearances, and abrupt behavior changes. Legal trouble starts to appear again. In 1987, police in Los Angeles arrest her at Los Angeles International Airport for possession of drug paraphernalia and cocaine. She later pleads no contest. The court orders counseling and probation. The arrest makes national headlines because of her past as a teen star from a still-beloved sitcom. Rehab becomes a cycle. Treatment centers admit her, release her, and then readmit her months later. Interviews from the late 1980s show her talking openly about wanting sobriety but struggling with cravings and withdrawal symptoms. Touring continues, but her role within the band shrinks as reliability becomes a concern. Promoters sometimes exclude her from shows if they fear she may not be able to perform. In 1992, police arrest her again for cocaine possession. She avoids jail by entering another treatment program. For a short period, she manages to remain sober, working quietly and staying out of tabloid stories. The pattern does not hold. Relapses continue through the early 1990s, and she moves in and out of structured programs. A major public turning point comes in 2008, when she publishes the memoir High on Arrival. In the book, she details decades of drug addiction and alleges a long-term sexual relationship with her father. She states that the abuse began during her teens. The claim receives widespread media coverage. Many family members support her addiction recovery, but her father, who died in 2001, cannot respond directly. Other relatives dispute the account. By the end of the decade, her name is tied not only to addiction but to one of the most unsettling family allegations to reach mainstream entertainment press. Drew Barrymore breaks early. The spotlight lands on her before she can spell half the words in the script. Drew Barrymore is born in 1975 into a famous acting family. At age 5, she appears in a dog food commercial, and filmmakers notice her energy. In 1982, she plays Gertie in E.T., the Extraterrestrial, one of the highest-grossing films of all time. The role makes her internationally recognizable before she reaches first grade. Success brings access to adult spaces. She attends industry parties with older performers and family members. By her own later accounts, she drinks alcohol at 9, uses marijuana at 10, and tries cocaine at 12. Magazines begin publishing stories about her nightlife, even though she is still a preteen. The public sees a smiling child on talk shows. Insiders see a minor in places meant for adults. Her first stay in a rehabilitation center comes at age 13. She completes treatment, returns home, and then relapses. In 1989, she enters a psychiatric facility after a suicide attempt. She remains there for months under structured supervision. During this time, court documents show that her mother files for custody changes, and Drew seeks legal independence. At 15, she becomes legally emancipated, gaining control over her finances and living arrangements. This move removes her mother as her guardian. It also forces her to manage adult responsibilities while still a teenager. She supports herself through acting roles, modeling work, and promotional appearances. She publishes a memoir, Little Girl Lost, which details her addiction and mental health struggles. The book becomes a bestseller and confirms the depth of her early problems. Hollywood always had shining stars, but beneath the surface lies a darker side, a history marked by manipulation, betrayal, and cruelty. Some actresses didn't just play villains on screen, they brought their ruthlessness into real life. From feuds that destroyed careers to schemes that went far beyond the cameras, their actions weren't just scandalous, they were downright chilling. But who were these women, and what made them cross the line? Norma Shearer. She was a stunning, poised actress at the top of her game in the 1930s, but with a little secret weapon up her sleeve: her husband, Irving Thalberg, the head honcho of MGM, the most powerful studio at the time. Being married to the boy wonder of Hollywood meant Norma wasn't just any actress. She practically had a direct line to the casting couch, and not in the way you'd think. Here's where it gets juicy. Norma was accused of using her marital connection to snag roles that other actresses were gunning for, sometimes ruthlessly. Take Joan Crawford, for instance. She and Norma were in a not-so-subtle battle for the spotlight. Joan once said, "How can I compete with Norma? She sleeps with the boss." It wasn't just Joan, though. Myrna Loy, another MGM star, also felt the sting of Norma's influence. Loy believed she lost roles because Norma had first dibs on the juiciest scripts. Norma wasn't just sitting around waiting for opportunities to fall into her lap, though. Oh no, she hustled. She even went so far as to commission provocative photos of herself to prove she could handle sexier, edgier roles like the lead in The Divorcee, a part that won her an Oscar. That move was bold, but it didn't win her many friends. Other actresses saw it as her playing dirty, using her privilege and connections to bulldoze her way to the top. And here's the kicker: Norma wasn't apologetic about any of it. She knew the power she had, and she used it shamelessly. To her, it was survival in a cutthroat industry. But to those on the losing end, like Joan and Myrna, it looked more like sabotage. Norma's career eventually faded, but her reputation as a savvy and selfish player in Hollywood's golden era is still part of her legacy. Was she a villain, or just a smart woman making the most of her circumstances? Depends on how you look at it. Either way, she left her mark, and not everyone was happy about it. Mae West. When you hear her name, you think of Hollywood's original queen of sass and self-promotion. Mae wasn't just a star, she was a force of nature, strutting through the entertainment world like she owned it. And honestly, she kinda did. But here's the thing. While Mae was bold, brilliant, and completely unforgettable, she had a way of making everything revolve around one person, Mae West. Mae was all about Mae, and she didn't care who got overshadowed along the way. In interviews, she'd dominate the conversation with her razor-sharp wit and trademark double entendres, barely giving anyone else a chance to shine. Co-stars, directors, they were just supporting characters in the Mae West show. She once said, "I never loved anybody as much as I loved myself." And let me tell you, she lived by that motto. On set, Mae insisted on having complete control over her lines, her wardrobe, and even how her scenes were shot. Directors found her exhausting, and co-stars often complained they were reduced to mere props. One infamous story involves a young Cary Grant, who got his big break in She Done Him Wrong because Mae thought he was hot. She literally plucked him out of obscurity and made him her leading man, but only because he made her look good. Mae even wrote most of her own scripts, which sounds impressive until you realize they were mostly vehicles for her to deliver one-liners and look fabulous. If a scene wasn't all about her, she'd either rewrite it or refuse to shoot it. Her co-stars? They were lucky if they got a word in edgewise. But here's the thing about Mae. She didn't care if people thought she was selfish. In fact, she leaned into it. She famously said, "I'm not afraid of criticism. I gave up that fear long ago." To Mae, being selfish wasn't a flaw. It was a survival strategy in an industry that chews people up and spits them out. So, love her or hate her, Mae West made Hollywood play by her rules. Was she selfish? Absolutely. But she was also a trailblazer, proving that a woman could run the show and own it without apologizing for a second. Marilyn Monroe. She had the looks, the charm, and that breathy voice that made her an icon, but behind all the glamour was a woman who didn't always play nice. Sure, Marilyn seemed like the sweet, shy girl next door, but in reality, she could be manipulative, selfish, and frustrating to deal with. Marilyn had a way of making everything about her, especially when it came to relationships. She charmed men with ease, but many of them, from Joe DiMaggio to Arthur Miller, felt like they were used as stepping stones or props to maintain her image. Marilyn craved adoration, and if she wasn't the center of attention, she'd find a way to turn the spotlight back on herself. She had a knack for keeping people hooked on her vulnerability, but some insiders felt it was all part of her act, a way to control those around her. On set, Marilyn's behavior drove directors and co-stars up the wall. She was notoriously late, sometimes by hours, leaving entire crews waiting while she finished getting ready or dealt with her personal dramas. Directors like Billy Wilder, who worked with her on Some Like It Hot, called her a nightmare to work with, even if the results were worth it. Studio executives lost money because of her delays, and she'd show up unprepared, forgetting her lines and making scenes take twice as long to shoot. What's wild is that Marilyn's antics weren't always accidental. Some believed she showed up late or caused chaos on purpose just to keep everyone off balance and ensure she remained the most important person in the room. She once said, "If I'd observed all the rules, I'd never have got anywhere." And honestly, that tells you everything you need to know. Still, Marilyn's charm was her secret weapon. Even when she upset people, they couldn't stay mad for long. She knew how to win people over with a pout or a laugh, and she leaned into that power whenever it suited her. Was she selfish? Probably. But in her world, where everyone wanted a piece of her, maybe it was the only way she knew how to survive. Lana Turner. She was known as the ultimate Hollywood glamour queen, famous for her beauty, charisma, and string of headline-grabbing romances. But beneath the shimmering exterior, Lana's personal life was a whirlwind of drama and questionable priorities, especially when it came to her role as a mother. Her focus on fame, love, and maintaining her image often left her daughter, Cheryl Crane, feeling like an afterthought in her life. Lana's love life was a tabloid dream, or nightmare, depending on how you look at it. She married 8 times to 7 different men, and each relationship seemed more chaotic than the last. Her constant search for love and validation often overshadowed her responsibilities as a mother. Cheryl, her only child, grew up in the middle of this storm, frequently shuffled to the side as Lana pursued her next romance or career move. The most infamous chapter of Lana's life, and the one that put her relationship with Cheryl under a microscope, was the demise of her abusive boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, in 1958. Stompanato was a mobster who had been physically and emotionally abusive to Lana. One night, during a particularly violent argument between Lana and Johnny, 14-year-old Cheryl intervened. She grabbed a knife and stabbed Stompanato to protect her mother. The incident was ruled justifiable homicide, but it threw Cheryl into the spotlight and left her emotionally scarred. Many people blamed Lana for exposing Cheryl to such a toxic environment in the first place. Critics said Lana's pattern of prioritizing her own happiness, especially in her choice of volatile, dangerous men, put her daughter in harm's way. Cheryl later revealed that she felt neglected and isolated, living in the shadow of her mother's glamorous yet chaotic life. She described how Lana's obsession with her public image often left her feeling like an accessory, not a priority. Even after the Stompanato tragedy, Lana continued to focus on maintaining her movie star persona, often at the expense of her relationship with Cheryl. Their mother-daughter bond remained strained for years, with Cheryl struggling to find her own identity outside of Lana's shadow. Lana's story is a complex one. On the one hand, she was a woman navigating a male-dominated industry, doing whatever it took to stay on top. On the other hand, her relentless pursuit of fame and love left behind a trail of emotional wreckage, with her daughter paying the steepest price. It's a classic case of Hollywood glamour hiding a much darker reality underneath. Gloria Swanson. This woman wasn't just a Hollywood actress. She was a powerhouse. In the silent film era, she ruled the screen with her dramatic flair, extravagant wardrobe, and larger-than-life persona. But behind all of that, Swanson had a reputation for doing whatever it took to get ahead, even if it meant stepping on a few toes, or breaking hearts, along the way. Swanson's ambition was unmatched. She wasn't content with being just another actress. She wanted to be the star. And she wasn't afraid to manipulate the people around her to climb higher. One of the most talked about examples was her relationship with Joseph P. Kennedy, father of future President John F. Kennedy. Kennedy wasn't just her lover. He was also her financier, helping to fund her lavish lifestyle and her failing production company. Swanson benefited greatly from the relationship, but when the financial fallout came, Kennedy walked away relatively unscathed, while Swanson's career took a hit. Critics argue she used Kennedy as much as he used her, making their affair a textbook case of mutual manipulation. Professionally, Swanson had a way of alienating people. She was fiercely independent and demanded creative control over her projects, which wasn't common for actresses at the time. While her drive was admirable, it didn't win her many friends in the industry. Directors and producers often found her difficult to work with because she insisted on doing things her way, even if it caused friction on set. Her personal life was just as messy. Swanson married 6 times, and her relationships often ended in scandal or bitterness. She seemed to view her partners as stepping stones, prioritizing her career over building lasting connections. Her third husband, French aristocrat Henri de la Falaise, was a particularly dramatic case. Their marriage gave her an air of European sophistication that elevated her status, but it ended when the glitter faded, leaving yet another broken tie in her wake. By the time she starred in Sunset Boulevard, her iconic comeback role that mirrored her own life, Swanson's reputation as a self-serving, fiercely ambitious star had already been cemented. In many ways, her performance as Norma Desmond was more autobiographical than anyone realized. Was Gloria Swanson a villain? Not exactly. She was a woman in an unforgiving industry, fighting for control of her destiny. But her relentless ambition often left others hurt, discarded, or disillusioned. To some, she was a trailblazer. To others, she was simply ruthless. Tallulah Bankhead. If you thought the luxurious lifestyle and fame of old Hollywood was all about prim and proper behavior, Bankhead proved you wrong. She was loud, brash, and lived life on her own terms, often at the expense of everyone around her. Bankhead's reputation for wild behavior was legendary. She was known for her heavy drinking, drug use, and a string of fiery affairs that were as scandalous as they were public. But what really set her apart was her complete lack of a filter. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, and when she did, it was often sharp, biting, and at times cruel. Her sharp tongue was both a weapon and a shield. Bankhead had a knack for making ruthless, cutting remarks about everyone, from co-stars to directors and even her own family. She once told a fellow actress, "I don't care what you do as long as you don't do it in the street and frighten the horses," a line that perfectly summed up her unapologetic nature. She would go out of her way to make people uncomfortable, whether by mocking others' looks or questioning their intelligence. It wasn't that she was insecure. Quite the opposite. She just didn't care about anyone else's feelings. Her cruelty extended beyond just words, too. On set, Bankhead was known for being difficult to work with, often causing trouble during shoots. Directors found her hard to control, and she frequently showed up late or in no condition to work, thanks to her partying habits. Yet somehow she managed to still get roles, largely due to her outrageous charm and undeniable screen presence. Bankhead's personal life was just as turbulent. She had multiple love affairs, some with famous men and women, but never seemed to form lasting connections. She used people as disposable objects to satisfy her own needs, whether it was attention, companionship, or just a wild night of fun. For her, relationships were more about entertainment than genuine emotional connection. Yet, despite all the chaos, Tallulah Bankhead became a cult figure, beloved by some for her outlandishness and celebrated for living a life that most could only dream of in terms of freedom, albeit with consequences. She didn't give a damn about social norms or expectations, and while many found her antics tiresome or even cruel, others admired her boldness. She lived life on her own terms, and damn the consequences. In the end, Tallulah Bankhead was more than just a Hollywood star. She was a chaotic force of nature, a person who didn't care what others thought, and who would rather burn bridges than play nice. In a way, she was the perfect reflection of an industry that often valued the appearance of perfection over the messiness of real life. Barbara Stanwyck. She had a reputation for being a master at playing tough, no-nonsense characters on screen, but it seems she took a bit of that tough exterior into her personal life, too. Stanwyck was all about self-preservation. She knew how to build a career and maintain an image, but she also had a knack for cutting ties with people when they no longer served her interests. She wasn't the type to keep people around just for the sake of it, whether it was friends, co-stars, or even family. If someone no longer had a role in her life, they were quickly shown the door. There was no room for sentimentality in Stanwyck's world. Her fiercely private nature didn't help her popularity in Hollywood circles either. While other stars might bask in the spotlight and engage with their colleagues or fans, Stanwyck kept her distance, often keeping to herself or her closest circle of people. She had a strict keep your business to yourself policy, which sometimes made her seem aloof, standoffish, or even unapproachable. This detached nature didn't endear her to some of her co-stars or those working closely with her. Despite being a beloved and respected actress, she often isolated herself on set, leaving others to feel like they didn't have a real connection with her. There was a certain coldness to her, especially when it came to personal relationships. She had 2 marriages, both of which ended badly. The first to actor Frank Fay was Rocky, marked by infidelity and tension, and after their divorce, Stanwyck's relationships with men were often seen as transactional rather than emotionally fulfilling. Stanwyck's approach to relationships wasn't just about keeping things private. It was about control. She was known for playing the role of the hard-nosed, calculating woman in many of her films, but it seems that role extended off-screen too. When she felt someone was a threat to her career, her personal space, or her privacy, they were quickly cut off. It wasn't about being mean. It was about protecting her territory, her image, and her career from anything that might cause her harm. Though many admired her for her unmatched acting talent, her emotional detachment and self-preserving nature left a trail of broken ties in Hollywood. While she was deeply respected for her work and known for being a professional on set, she wasn't the kind of person who would stick around for the long haul when it came to friendships or anything that didn't directly benefit her. Stanwyck's legacy is filled with glowing accolades for her skill, but her personal story is one of cold pragmatism and calculated decisions. She wasn't afraid to burn bridges if it meant advancing herself or protecting her space. Bette Davis. She was raw, unapologetic, and fiercely determined to maintain her star status no matter what it took. But in her relentless pursuit of stardom, Davis wasn't exactly concerned with how many bridges she burned or who got offended along the way. In fact, she seemed to almost revel in her reputation for being tough, demanding, and sometimes downright cruel. Her famous feuds and sharp tongue were as much a part of her legacy as her Oscar-winning performances. One of the most legendary and most vicious rivalries in Hollywood history was the one between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. Their feud, which started in the 1930s, reached new heights when they were cast as the leads in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962. The two actresses couldn't have been more different, and their animosity went beyond mere professional competition. Davis once said, "She's a bitch, but she's my bitch." That pretty much sums up the animosity between them. There was no love lost, only cold, calculated contempt. The stories from the set of Baby Jane are legendary. They would constantly try to one-up each other, sabotaging each other's scenes and playing psychological games behind the scenes. It wasn't just on-screen drama. It was real, personal, and filled with spite. But Davis didn't reserve her sharp tongue for just one person. She was known for cutting people down, colleagues or not. She didn't care if she offended anyone with her direct and often hurtful criticisms. Directors, co-stars, and even studio heads could find themselves on the receiving end of Davis's biting remarks. She was a woman who demanded perfection from herself and everyone around her, and if you didn't measure up, you were fair game. If you couldn't take the heat, you were quickly discarded. It wasn't about making friends for Bette. It was about making sure she stayed on top, no matter the cost. Davis's famous outbursts and public criticism didn't make her popular in Hollywood, but they certainly kept her in the conversation. She was known for her bluntness and her refusal to play the game the way the studio system wanted her to. While many stars of the time were busy towing the line and maintaining a squeaky clean image, Davis made it clear she was going to do things her way, even if it meant stepping on a few toes along the way. Her story is one of fierce determination, but also one marked by a trail of offended colleagues and damaged relationships. Davis wasn't afraid to ruffle feathers if it meant maintaining her status as one of the greatest actresses in Hollywood, and while that made her unforgettable, it also made her a polarizing figure. In the end, Bette Davis proved that in the cutthroat world of Hollywood, it wasn't enough to just be talented. You also had to be willing to fight, even if it meant losing a few friends along the way. Joan Crawford. Here's what you may not know. Joan Crawford is one of the most infamous stars in Hollywood history, but not for the reasons most would expect. While she was adored by millions for her glamorous roles behind closed doors, Crawford's life was a storm of manipulation, control, and a relentless desire for success at any cost. Crawford was known for putting her career above everything else, family included. She often seemed to view her relationships, especially with her children, as mere extensions of her public image, which she worked tirelessly to maintain. But her personal life was far from ideal, and it wasn't long before rumors began to swirl about how she treated her family, especially her children. In her later years, her adopted daughter, Christina Crawford, famously penned a memoir called Mommy Dearest, in which she accused Joan of severe emotional and physical abuse. The book portrayed Crawford as a cold, controlling mother, and the revelations were shocking. Christina described Joan as a woman who expected perfection, punished her children for minor transgressions, and was a tyrant behind closed doors.
When you hear the name Frances Farmer, what comes to mind? Maybe her impeccable talent, or maybe her beauty and grace? Well, there's more to this legendary actress than most know about. From the fact that she single-handedly took on the entire system in Hollywood, to the harsh allegations and stumbles that her life and career threw at her, many occurrences would have been best kept secret, but they all make the eventful, sad, tragic, and intriguing life of Frances Farmer. So let's start from the top. The onset of stardom. Frances Elena Farmer was born on September 19, 1913, in Seattle, Washington. Her mother, Cora Lillian Van Ornum, was a boarding house operator and dietitian, while her father, Ernest Melvin Farmer, was a lawyer. Her father came from Spring Valley, Minnesota, and her mother was from Oregon, with roots tracing back to pioneers. Frances had an older sister named Edith, an older brother named Wesley, and an older half-sister named Rita from her mother's first marriage. Tragically, before Wesley and Edith were born, her mother lost another daughter to pneumonia during infancy. When Frances was just 4 years old, her parents separated, and her mother moved the children to Los Angeles to be closer to her sister, Zella. In early 1925, the family relocated to Chico, California, where Lillian pursued a career in nutrition research. However, the demands of caring for her children soon overwhelmed her, and she decided it was best for them to return to their father in Seattle. Their Aunt Zella drove them to Albany, Oregon, where they boarded a train back north. This turbulent period had a profound effect on Frances. She later recalled that the trip marked the end of her dependent childhood, forcing her to grapple with the unpredictable nature of adults and her shifting home life. Lillian eventually returned to Seattle after her home in Chico burned down, but she and Ernest remained separated. The family shared a household, though the parents did not reconcile. In the fall of 1929, when Frances was 16, Lillian and Ernest finalized their divorce, and Lillian moved to Bremerton, Washington, leaving the children with their father. Frances attended West Seattle High School, where she distinguished herself not only as a student, but as a writer. In 1931, as a senior, she entered a writing contest sponsored by Scholastic magazine and won $100 for her essay titled God Dies. This essay, influenced by her readings of Friedrich Nietzsche, was a bold exploration of her spiritual doubts and agnosticism, controversial for its time, and reflective of her intellectual curiosity and independent thinking. After high school, Frances enrolled at the University of Washington, initially majoring in journalism. She worked various jobs to support herself, including stints as an usherette, waitress, tutor, soap factory laborer, and singing waitress at Mount Rainier National Park. During her sophomore year, she became involved in the university's drama department, starring in numerous plays such as Helen of Troy, Everyman, and Uncle Vanya. Her performance in the 1934 production of Alien Corn earned her favorable reviews, signaling her potential as a serious actress. In her final year of college in 1935, Frances won a contest for the leftist newspaper The Voice of Action, which awarded her a trip to the Soviet Union. Despite her mother's objections, Frances accepted the prize, motivated by her desire to see the pioneering work of the Moscow Art Theater. This trip fueled speculation about her political beliefs, with some suggesting she was a communist. The same year, she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in drama, setting the stage for her entry into Hollywood. An illustrious career begins. In the summer of 1935, after returning from the Soviet Union, Frances Farmer made a stop in New York City with the aim of beginning a theater career. During her stay, she met talent agent Shepard Traub, who saw her potential and connected her with Oscar Serlin, a talent scout from Paramount Pictures. Serlin arranged a screen test for Farmer, which led to an incredible opportunity. Paramount offered her a 7-year contract, which she signed in New York City on her 22nd birthday. Following her screen tests on Long Island, Farmer moved to Los Angeles to commence her work with Paramount. Upon her arrival, she underwent dental surgery, to correct a gap in her front teeth, a common procedure for aspiring stars to meet Hollywood's beauty standards. She spent countless hours on the Paramount studio lot, engaged in screen testing and extensive training. By November 1935, she had secured her first role in the B-movie Too Many Parents, 1936, a comedy about young men in military school. The film was a box office success, marking a promising start to her Hollywood career. Shortly after completing the film in February 1936, Farmer married Leif Erikson, a fellow Paramount contract player she had met on the studio lot. With her marriage, she continued to build her career, landing a lead role in the drama Border Flight. Later that same year, Farmer achieved a significant milestone by being cast in her first A feature, Rhythm on the Range, a Western starring Bing Crosby. She later reminisced about the film, revealing that she had a crush on Crosby since high school and felt awestruck to work alongside him as his leading lady in her first major film. The film garnered favorable reviews and significantly boosted Farmer's public reputation. After its release, Paramount studio head Adolph Zukor called her and advised her to start acting like a rising star. However, Farmer resisted the Hollywood lifestyle, preferring to spend time at her home in Laurel Canyon with Erikson and declining invitations to Hollywood parties and events. In an attempt to market her, Paramount branded her in press releases as the star who would not go Hollywood, emphasizing her eccentric fashion choices. During the summer of 1936, Farmer was lent to Samuel Goldwyn to appear in Come and Get It, based on Edna Ferber's novel. In the film, she portrayed a young woman pursued by her mother's former lover. Initially directed by Howard Hawks, the film saw a directorial change when William Wyler replaced Hawks midway through production. Farmer, unsure about the change, clashed with Wyler during filming. Wyler later commented that the nicest thing he could say about her was that she was unbearable. Despite their tumultuous working relationship, Hawks admired Farmer's talent, stating she had more talent than anyone he had ever worked with. The film's premiere took place in Seattle, Farmer's hometown, where she maintained a quiet and reserved demeanor, leading to news reports labeling her as cold and aloof. Nonetheless, Come and Get It received praise from both the public and critics, with many reviews hailing Farmer as a newfound star, even comparing her to Greta Garbo. In 1937, Farmer was lent to RKO to star opposite Cary Grant in The Toast of New York, a film about a Wall Street tycoon. The production was fraught with difficulties as Farmer was unhappy with the rebranding of her character from a hard-edged vixen to an ingenue fresh from Sunnybrook. On set, she argued with director Roland V. Lee and gave dismissive interviews to the press. Dissatisfied with the direction her career was taking after The Toast of New York, Farmer resisted the studio's attempts to control her and their efforts to glamorize her private life. A 1937 article in Collier's magazine sympathetically described her as indifferent to her clothing and noted that she drove an older model green roadster. Also in 1937, she appeared in the crime drama exclusive opposite Fred MacMurray and the Technicolor adventure film Ebb Tide opposite Ray Milland. However, as she rose to fame and became all she ever wanted in Hollywood, Frances Farmer was seen as a tool by studio executives, and they attempted to control her. Thankfully, she had a strong will and a bold personality. Exposure to the dark side of Hollywood. Hollywood around the 1930s was not a pretty sight, especially behind the scenes. Studio executives wielded immense power, often treating actors as mere commodities. These executives, the unseen puppeteers, orchestrated every move of the stars they created, ensuring that every smile, every line, and every appearance was meticulously controlled to maximize profit. They thrived on the submission and conformity of their stars, but Frances Farmer was not one to conform. From the moment she set foot in Hollywood, Farmer's fiery spirit and determination to retain her individuality were evident. While most newcomers would eagerly submit to the studio's demands, Frances displayed an unusual defiance. Paramount Pictures, one of the most influential studios, quickly realized they had a different kind of star on their hands. Despite their attempts to mold her into the perfect Hollywood actress, Frances resisted fiercely. Farmer's outspoken nature made her a thorn in the side of studio executives. She challenged the oppressive norms of the industry, openly criticizing the lack of creative freedom and the manipulative practices of the studio heads. She refused to attend glamorous parties, shunned the superficial lifestyle, and publicly derided the industry's pretentiousness. This rebellious attitude was both a strength and a vulnerability. One significant clash occurred during the filming of Come and Get It. Initially directed by Howard Hawks, the production saw a midway directorial switch to William Wyler. a move that angered Frances. Her defiance was palpable, resulting in heated exchanges with Wyler, who later remarked that the nicest thing he could say about her was that she was unbearable. Yet Hawks, who had seen her talent firsthand, maintained that she possessed more talent than anyone he had ever worked with. Frances's tumultuous relationship with directors was a reflection of her broader resistance to the control exerted by studio executives. The consequences of Frances's rebellious behavior were swift and severe. Paramount, frustrated by her nonconformity, sought to rein her in by branding her as the star who would not go Hollywood, capitalizing on her eccentricity while subtly attempting to isolate her. Despite her successful performances in films like Rhythm on the Range and Come and Get It, her defiance meant that studio heads viewed her as a liability. The industry's response to her rebellion was not to support or understand, but to control and punish. Farmer was lent to other studios, often relegated to roles that did not match her talent or ambitions. Her dissatisfaction with her career direction became apparent during the production of The Toast of New York, where she clashed with director Roland V. Lee and expressed her disdain for the industry in interviews. The secret she tried to hide. Frances Farmer's personal life was as tumultuous as her career. The vivacious actress, often caught in the public eye, struggled to balance her professional and private worlds. Her marriage to fellow Paramount contract player Leif Erikson in 1936 was a notable chapter in her life. However, the pressures of Hollywood and their careers took a toll on their relationship, which was further strained by Farmer's growing discontent with the industry. Despite the glamorous image projected by the studio, Farmer's personal life was far from perfect. She often found solace in her home in Laurel Canyon, preferring the quiet of her private sanctuary to the glitzy Hollywood parties. This retreat into her personal space, however, did not shield her from the relentless scrutiny and control exerted by the studio executives. Beneath the surface of her rebellious exterior, Frances Farmer grappled with significant mental health issues. The pressures of stardom, combined with her intrinsic defiance of the Hollywood system, led to severe emotional turmoil. In an era when mental health was poorly understood and often stigmatized, Farmer's struggles were compounded by a lack of proper support and treatment. Substance abuse became a tragic coping mechanism for Farmer. The cocktail of alcohol and prescribed medications she relied on further clouded her judgment and exacerbated her mental health issues. This spiral of addiction and untreated mental illness led to increasingly erratic behavior, which the studios were ill-equipped to manage with anything other than punitive measures. The culmination of Farmer's struggles came in 1942 when she was infamously arrested for driving with her headlights on high beam, a minor infraction that escalated dramatically. Her arrest quickly devolved into a scandal amplified by her defiance and the subsequent sensationalist media coverage. During the arrest, Farmer's outburst and resistance to the police were widely publicized, painting her as a volatile and unhinged star. The aftermath of the arrest was even more damning. The court deemed her behavior as evidence of severe mental instability, leading to a series of incarcerations in psychiatric institutions. These institutions, far from providing the help she needed, subjected her to brutal treatments, including electroconvulsive therapy and lobotomy, practices that were more punitive than therapeutic. The nightmare continues. By the early 1940s, Farmer's mental health had deteriorated significantly. Her defiance against the studio system, coupled with her struggles with substance abuse, led to increasingly erratic behavior. The public nature of her troubles only intensified the scrutiny and pressure she faced. The infamous 1942 arrest was the turning point. After being apprehended for a minor traffic violation, Farmer's vehement resistance and the subsequent courtroom outburst were widely reported. Labeled as unmanageable and unstable, the court ordered a psychiatric evaluation. The media, ever hungry for scandal, painted her as a madwoman, and the judicial system, influenced by the sensationalist press and the lack of understanding of mental health, deemed her unfit. The result was her commitment to a series of psychiatric institutions, starting with the Kimball Sanitarium in La Crescenta, California. On the other hand, Farmer's time in psychiatric institutions was marked by allegations of severe mistreatment and abuse, transforming her struggle into a nightmarish ordeal. These facilities, far from being havens of healing, subjected her to a series of punitive treatments that were both archaic and inhumane. Reports and accounts from Farmer and those close to her painted a grim picture of the conditions she endured. At Western State Hospital in Steilacoom, Washington, where she spent a significant portion of her institutionalization, Farmer allegedly underwent electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. This treatment, often administered without proper anesthesia or consent, was excruciating and left her disoriented and traumatized. ECT was used liberally during that era, more as a tool to subdue and control patients than to offer genuine therapeutic benefits. Farmer also recounted being subjected to hydrotherapy, which involved being submerged in cold water for extended periods, and prolonged solitary confinement. These methods were intended to break her spirit and force compliance. However, the most harrowing allegation was that of a transorbital lobotomy, a procedure that was rumored but never conclusively proven. If true, this would have had devastating and irreversible effects on her mental and emotional faculties. Beyond the physical torture, Farmer faced psychological abuse and neglect. Isolated from her family and friends, she was stripped of her dignity and humanity. The staff, seeing her as merely another unruly patient, treated her with contempt and indifference. This compounded her sense of abandonment and hopelessness, deepening her psychological scars. The years Frances Farmer spent in psychiatric institutions irreparably damaged her life and career. Emerging from the harrowing experiences, she was a shadow of her former self. The once vibrant and defiant actress was now subdued, her spirit broken by the relentless abuse and mistreatment. The stigma of her institutionalization followed her, overshadowing her previous achievements and tainting public perception. Her career, once brimming with potential, was in ruins. Hollywood, ever fickle, had moved on, and the industry that once celebrated her talent now shunned her. Attempts to resurrect her career met with limited success. In the 1950s, Farmer made sporadic appearances on stage and television, but she was never able to recapture the heights of her early success. The public, conditioned by years of scandalous headlines, viewed her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. The psychological toll of her institutionalization was profound. Farmer struggled with trust and intimacy, her relationships marred by the trauma she endured. Her mental health, though somewhat stabilized, remained fragile, and she battled with the lasting effects of the abuse for the rest of her life. The narrative of her life became a cautionary tale of the brutal realities faced by those who fall out of favor with Hollywood's powerful elite. Failed attempts at a comeback. Emerging from the shadows of psychiatric institutions in the early 1950s, Frances Farmer embarked on a courageous journey to reclaim her career and life. The Hollywood she re-entered was markedly different from the one she had left, with new stars and shifting trends. Despite the odds, Farmer's determination to revive her career was unwavering. Farmer's first significant step towards a comeback came with her return to the stage. She appeared in regional theater productions, where she found solace and a semblance of normalcy. Farmer's attempts to revive her career were met with challenges, both within the industry and in her personal life. The Hollywood elite, wary of her troubled history, were reluctant to offer her significant roles. The industry's focus on youth and glamour further marginalized Farmer, who was now in her 40s and bore the scars of her ordeals. The press, ever eager for sensational stories, continued to scrutinize her every move. Any misstep or hint of instability was magnified, making it difficult for Farmer to fully escape her past. The constant public and media scrutiny took a toll on her mental health, exacerbating her struggles. On a personal level, Farmer faced numerous obstacles. Her relationships were often strained by the residual effects of her institutionalization and the trauma she had endured. Trust issues and emotional scars made it difficult for her to form lasting connections. She experienced periods of isolation and depression, battling the lingering demons of her past. Farmer's financial situation was also precarious. The years of institutionalization had drained her resources, and the sporadic nature of her work provided little financial security. She often relied on the support of friends and family who stood by her during her most challenging times. Despite these hardships, Farmer showed remarkable resilience. Her autobiography, Will There Really Be a Morning, published in 1972, offered a candid and poignant account of her life and struggles. The book received critical acclaim and helped to shift public perception, portraying Farmer not just as a tragic figure, but as a survivor of a deeply flawed system. Her sad final years. Frances Farmer's final years were a blend of quiet resilience and lingering sorrow. After her show, Frances Farmer Presents, ended in 1964, she retreated from the public eye, choosing to live a more private life. Her health, both mental and physical, continued to be a concern. with bouts of illness and depression marking her later years. In the late 1960s, she moved to a small home in Indianapolis, where she lived with a companion who provided care and support. Her life became one of relative solitude, far removed from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Yet, in this quiet existence, Farmer found a degree of peace. Tragically, Frances Farmer passed away on August 1, 1970, at the age of 56 from esophageal cancer. Her death marked the end of a tumultuous journey.
A-list face, leading man status, breath so foul it cleared a room. Old Hollywood had some dirty secrets, but which star was the worst of them all? Marlon Brando's overlooked hygiene. He was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, but working with him wasn't always easy. Some days people said it was hard just to stand next to him. By the 1970s, Brando was showing up to sets looking rough. Crew members from Apocalypse Now and The Missouri Break said he often skipped showers, didn't use deodorant, and wore the same clothes for days. One actor supposedly said he stank. People stayed far away. The smell was bad enough that some actors brought their own scented tissues or cologne just to get through scenes with him. Directors even started filming outdoors or opening windows just to air things out. And it wasn't just body odor. Brando also had terrible breath. His teeth were yellow, and people said he chewed with his mouth open. One rumor claimed he ate garlic or onions before romantic scenes. Maybe as a joke, maybe not. Either way, no one was laughing. Vivien Leigh, his co-star in A Streetcar Named Desire, complained about having to do love scenes with him. She said he brought real emotion to the role, but didn't bring soap. He also had a habit of acting like none of it mattered. When asked about his behavior, Brando would just brush it off or change the subject. He didn't care if people were uncomfortable. Even early in his career, Brando wasn't into grooming. He was focused on the acting. Smelling good? That wasn't part of the job, at least in his mind. The strange part? He still got leading roles, big ones. Directors worked around it, co-stars put up with it. He was that talented. But behind the camera, a lot of people were fed up. They didn't see a genius. They saw a guy who refused to bathe. And when it came to on-set hygiene, Brando might have been the worst. Clark Gable's rotten reputation. He looked perfect on screen, sharp suits, slick hair, big smile, but behind the scenes? That smile came with a serious warning. By the time Gable was 32, most of his teeth were gone. He had gum disease and wore dentures. The problem? His breath was horrible. Vivien Leigh, his co-star in Gone with the Wind, hated filming kissing scenes with him. She once told friends it was the worst part of the job. People around him said his bad breath could fill a room. The dentures didn't fit well, and Gable didn't always clean them properly. On top of that, he smoked constantly. Cigars, cigarettes, whatever was handy. That made it worse. But no one dared say much. Gable was the king of Hollywood. Fans loved him. Studios protected him. He kept getting leading roles, and no one wanted to make waves by complaining. To cover it up, makeup artists gave him mints or sprayed the air around him. Sometimes he'd chew gum between takes. It helped a little, but not enough. The smell stuck around. What's wild is that Gable cared a lot about his appearance. He dressed well, shaved clean, and always looked the part. But when it came to dental care, that part of the routine was long gone. In interviews, he joked about losing his teeth in a childhood accident. But off-camera, people knew the real story: decay, infections, and years of ignoring his dentist's advice. Despite everything, fans never knew. On screen, he looked flawless. You couldn't smell the problem from your movie seat. But ask his co-stars, and you'd hear the truth. The kisses may have looked romantic, but the experience was anything but. Joan Crawford's clean freak habits. She didn't just like things clean, she demanded it. Her house wasn't just tidy, it was spotless, always. People who visited said it felt more like a hospital than a home. She scrubbed the floors daily. She cleaned the bathroom multiple times a day. Even her soap was cleaned before she used it. Crawford wasn't just strict with herself. She expected everyone else to follow her rules too. Her kids said they were punished if they left fingerprints on furniture. Everything had to be in its place. No dust, no dirt, no excuses. She used bleach. A lot. She bleached her clothes, her curtains, even her kitchen counters. One housekeeper said her hands peeled from touching so many cleaning products. Another claimed Crawford once threw away an entire set of towels because they weren't folded perfectly. Her obsession didn't stop at home. On set, she brought her own toilet paper. She wouldn't use dressing rooms unless they were scrubbed to her standards. If a chair looked dirty, she wouldn't sit. If a co-star smelled like smoke or sweat, she'd complain. Even her beauty routine was extreme. She took ice baths to tighten her skin. She washed her face with hot water, then cold, several times a day. Every night she slept with her eyebrows taped in place to stay lifted. Some called it discipline, others called it madness. But Crawford saw it as control. In a world where actresses were often powerless, her cleaning habits gave her something to manage. Her daughter, Christina Crawford, later wrote in Mommy Dearest about the harsh routines and punishments she lived through. Whether you believe every word or not, plenty of insiders confirmed Joan's obsession with hygiene. While most old Hollywood stars were skipping showers, Crawford was scrubbing like her life depended on it. She wasn't the dirtiest by far, but she may have been the most extreme. Errol Flynn's no-soap swagger. He had a reputation as a ladies' man, swashbuckling, charming, and always center stage. But up close, he didn't smell like romance. He smelled like sweat. Flynn didn't like bathing. According to crew members, he could go days without showering. One former co-star called him dashing on camera, musty off it. Even in hot weather, Flynn barely used deodorant. His natural scent became infamous on sets. Costume designers had to wash his clothes constantly because of the body odor. Some said his costumes would smell so bad by midweek, they had to make doubles just to swap them out. In one case, a film crew requested open-air sets just to deal with the problem. His hygiene habits weren't just about skipping showers. Flynn was known to eat on set, spill food on himself, and keep filming without changing. Makeup artists said he sometimes refused grooming touch-ups. One joked that getting him into a clean shirt was harder than getting him to learn his lines. Still, women lined up for him. His charm, his looks, and his on-screen confidence made him untouchable. In public, no one suspected a thing. But behind the scenes, co-stars and crew dreaded close scenes with him. Some believed his attitude came from ego. He didn't think he had to try. Others blamed his hard-partying lifestyle. Flynn drank often, slept little, and treated movie sets like an afterthought. His bad hygiene eventually became part of his legend, a mix of wild charm and wild odor. For every person who said he was electric, someone else would say, "Yeah, but don't stand too close." Marilyn Monroe's perfume trick. She is remembered for glamour, elegance, and that famous line, "I wear Chanel No. 5 and nothing else." But behind the perfume, there wasn't always soap. Marilyn had a habit of skipping showers. Friends and assistants said she'd stay in bed all day, sometimes for days. Her sheets would go unchanged and laundry piled up. She didn't seem to mind. One makeup artist from Some Like It Hot said Marilyn often showed up late, unwashed and coated in perfume. Crew members learned to expect it. Strong scent, wrinkled clothes, and oily hair hidden under a scarf. She also had pets, lots of them. Her home reportedly smelled like cats, perfume, and stale makeup. Visitors were surprised by the mess. Marilyn didn't clean, didn't cook, and barely kept up her space. Most of the time, assistants did what they could, but it wasn't enough. Still, she always looked flawless on camera. Her skin glowed, her hair sparkled. That was the magic of lighting, editing, and a team working overtime to make her shine. She wasn't trying to be messy. Monroe battled anxiety, depression, and chronic fatigue. Some days, she didn't have the energy to get out of bed, let alone clean herself or her home. Her hygiene issues weren't just laziness, they were part of a bigger struggle. Co-stars tried not to comment, but a few stories slipped. Tony Curtis, her co-star in Some Like It Hot, once joked that kissing her was like kissing Hitler. While he later said it was a joke taken too far, people wondered what he meant. Marilyn lived in a cloud of perfume and pressure. She used Chanel as a shield, something to cover the chaos just under the surface. She may have been the most glamorous woman in the world, but behind the scenes, her hygiene told a very different story. Cary Grant's shower obsession. In a town full of stars who cut corners, he was the guy who never skipped a step. He didn't just look polished, he was polished. And clean. Always clean. While some actors could go days without touching soap, Grant had the opposite habit. He reportedly showered up to 5 times a day. Morning, shower. Before work, shower. After a sweaty scene under the hot lights, you guessed it, shower. He took cleanliness seriously and everyone around him knew it. Assistants said he carried extra clothes, backup cologne, and more toiletries than most leading ladies. His hotel rooms were always stocked with expensive soaps and creams. Crew members joked that if Grant had to pick between lunch and a shower, he'd be towel drying by noon. It wasn't just about smelling good. Grant believed hygiene was part of being a professional. He once told a young actor that being clean wasn't a luxury, it was part of the job. The camera picked up everything, and he didn't want even a smudge showing up on screen. Grant also had a thing for order. His wardrobe was color-coded. His dressing room was spotless. Makeup artists barely had to touch him up. He showed up fresh, clean-shaven, and perfectly dressed. Always. Even into his 60s, people commented on how sharp he looked. That wasn't luck. He didn't just age well. He worked at it. He believed in self-care before it was trendy. And it wasn't just surface level. Grant was known to be calm, respectful, and courteous on set. He didn't yell, didn't show up hungover, and didn't cause chaos. That made his squeaky clean image more than just a rumor, it was earned. In an era when many stars were hiding behind smoke and sweat, Cary Grant stood out. He didn't rely on perfume to fake it. He bathed, he groomed, and he showed up ready. No drama, no dirt. He may not have made headlines for bad behavior, but when it came to hygiene, he set the gold standard. Jean Harlow's bleach routine gone wrong. She was known for her stunning platinum hair. It was iconic, instantly recognizable, and part of what made her a major Hollywood star. But keeping that look wasn't easy, and it came with serious consequences. Her bleach routine was harsh. She didn't use store-bought products or go to fancy salons. Instead, her personal stylist applied a homemade cocktail of peroxide, ammonia, and other chemicals directly to her scalp. This happened nearly every week, sometimes twice. There were no gloves, no ventilation, just a metal bowl, harsh fumes, and lots of pain. The bleach burned. Harlow would sit through the process even when her scalp blistered. Over time, her hair began to thin out. By her mid-20s, she was already relying on wigs during bad flare-ups. Crew members said you could see redness on her scalp during close-ups. No one talked about it, but everyone noticed. She didn't wash her hair much. Instead, she used powder to soak up oil and kept layering bleach on top. The smell wasn't pleasant. Chemicals mixed with sweat, but it was all part of maintaining the platinum look. Harlow's friends later said she cried after some of her bleaching sessions. The pain was real, but the pressure to stay camera-ready was stronger. She kept going, even as her scalp developed sores and infections. One doctor warned her to stop. She didn't. Studios didn't push back either. They wanted the look, no matter the cost. She began suffering from headaches, fatigue, and frequent illnesses. Some people now believe the heavy chemical exposure made her existing health issues worse. Though she died young, at just 26, there's no official link between her beauty routine and her death. Still, the timing left people wondering. She made blonde hair famous, but she also paid a price few others did. Jean Harlow didn't just damage her hair, she damaged her health. In old Hollywood, no one questioned it. They just told her to bleach again. W.C. Fields' boozy funk. He was known for 2 things, his sharp wit and his drinking. The drinking wasn't just a behind-the-scenes rumor, it was part of his identity. But with it came a smell that was impossible to ignore. Fields didn't hide his love for alcohol. He drank daily, often starting in the morning. He claimed it helped with nerves and kept his mind sharp. But while his lines stayed funny, his body didn't bounce back the same way. The drinking affected everything: his health, his energy, and definitely his hygiene. People who worked with him described a mix of alcohol sweat, stale breath, and unwashed clothes. One assistant said his dressing room smelled like an old bar. Another crew member from the 1940s claimed that makeup artists would layer on powder and cologne just to dull the scent before filming. His personal grooming was hit or miss. Some days he showed up clean. Other times he looked like he hadn't touched soap in days. His hair was often greasy, and he sometimes wore the same outfit multiple days in a row. Fields wasn't the type to care what others thought. If someone made a comment, he'd crack a joke or change the subject. People were hesitant to speak up, especially since he was still delivering solid performances. But it became harder to ignore. Co-stars occasionally complained about doing close scenes with him. Some films scheduled his shots early in the day, hoping he'd smell better before the drinking kicked in. His health declined in his later years. He developed skin problems and stomach issues, and his appearance changed. But even as he slowed down, he refused to give up the alcohol or change his hygiene habits. W.C. Fields could light up a scene, but off-camera, it was a different story. His scent entered the room before he did, and for those working around him, there wasn't enough cologne in the world to mask it. Bette Davis's nicotine-stained look. She didn't care what people thought, and that included her smoking. She lit up constantly, on set, in her dressing room, at press events. She smoked so much, some joked she had a cigarette in her hand more than a script. Estimates say she smoked up to 4 packs a day. That's 80 cigarettes, every single day. Her fingers were stained yellow, her teeth darkened over time. Even her voice changed, raspy and deep, thanks to decades of puffing through takes. Makeup artists had to work overtime, whitening creams, heavy lipstick, powder on her hands. They tried to hide the stains, but nothing could fully cover the damage. In close-ups, the evidence showed fingertips that looked burnt, lips with uneven color, and a constant cloud of smoke just off camera. She rarely tried to mask the smell. Her wardrobe reeked of smoke. One assistant said her costumes had to be aired out between scenes. Some co-stars quietly requested fewer close-ups or changed blocking to avoid standing too close, but Davis didn't care. She said smoking helped her think. She believed it sharpened her performance, and in some ways, it did add to her sharp, no-nonsense persona. It became part of her image, intense, bold, and a little rough around the edges. Even as health warnings about smoking started surfacing, she kept going. When asked if she'd ever quit, she replied, "If I start acting badly, I'll cut back." That day never came. Over time, the effects showed. She had chronic coughs, tooth problems, and vocal strain. Still, she kept lighting up. In her final films, the makeup team worked even harder, but by then, fans had gotten used to the look. Bette Davis was never about being soft or sweet. She owned her bad habits and made no apologies. But when it came to hygiene, the smoking took its toll. The stains, the smell, the breath, it was all part of the package. She was a legend, no question, but she definitely didn't smell like one. Rita Hayworth's hidden decline. She lit up the screen with elegance. She was the love goddess of the 1940s, glamorous, polished, and seemingly perfect. But behind closed doors, things weren't as glossy. By the 1960s, her personal hygiene had started to slip, and those around her noticed. The shift wasn't overnight. Rita had struggled for years with alcoholism, but she kept it mostly hidden during her peak. By her 40s, though, the effects were becoming harder to ignore. Friends and colleagues said her grooming habits became inconsistent. She missed appointments. She forgot to bathe. Some said she showed up to meetings wearing the same clothes from days before. One makeup artist who worked with her in the late 60s recalled that her hair was often unwashed and greasy. Stylists had to work overtime to make her camera ready. She still looked beautiful, but up close the toll was visible. Stained fingers, dry skin, sour breath. These weren't signs of aging. They were signs of someone slipping away. At times, Rita would lash out or become confused. Some assumed it was the alcohol. Others suspected something more. In the early 70s, during a press tour, her behavior became so erratic that reporters speculated she was having a breakdown. What they didn't know was that she was already battling Alzheimer's, years before it was diagnosed. But even before the diagnosis, the signs were there. She stopped washing her clothes regularly. Her once glamorous image gave way to wrinkled outfits and missed touch-ups. She'd show up late, or not at all. Friends said they stopped visiting her home because it smelled stale, like wine and sweat, and was often in disarray. Studios quietly backed away. Roles stopped coming. She'd gone from red carpet royalty to someone people didn't recognize anymore, not just in appearance, but in presence. It wasn't just about alcohol or illness. It was everything catching up with her at once. For a star who once set the standard for beauty, Rita's decline was heartbreaking to watch. She never meant to let herself go, but in the end, the glamour faded, and so did the woman behind it. If you think modern celebs get canceled fast, wait until you hear what got these old-school stars hated by fans, co-stars, and entire studios. Golden Age Hollywood was messy before social media. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. In the early 1920s, he was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. He made millions laugh with his slapstick comedy and was one of the first actors to sign a $1 million contract. But in 1921, everything changed. Over Labor Day weekend, Arbuckle attended a party at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco. A young actress named Virginia Rappe also showed up. Later that night, she collapsed and was taken to the hospital. A few days later, she died. Rumors spread quickly. Arbuckle was accused of harming her at the party. The headlines were brutal. Papers called him a monster. Crowds showed up outside the courthouse during his trial, shouting for justice. It didn't matter that there was no solid proof against him. The public had already made up its mind. Arbuckle went through 3 trials. The first 2 ended without a decision. In the third, he was finally found not guilty. The jury even apologized, saying he should never have been charged. But by then, it was too late. The damage was done. His films were pulled from theaters. The press painted him as a villain. Movie studios distanced themselves. Even though he was cleared, his career never recovered. What made it worse was how quickly Hollywood turned on him. Friends in the industry disappeared. People who once praised him stayed silent. He tried to make a comeback under a fake name, but it didn't stick. The scandal changed Hollywood. It led to tighter rules about actors' behavior. Arbuckle's story became a warning for others. One headline could ruin a career overnight. He died in 1933, just as he was finally about to star in a new film. He was 46. Roscoe Arbuckle's fall wasn't just about a court case. It was about how fast fame can turn to hate. One moment, he was loved by millions. The next, he was the most hated man in Hollywood. Wallace Beery. He looked like a teddy bear. Big guy, gruff voice, but lovable on screen. Off screen, though, a completely different story. By the 1930s, Beery was one of MGM's top stars. He even won an Oscar for The Champ. But ask anyone who worked with him and they'd tell you the same thing. He was a nightmare. Beery had a habit of stealing scenes. He'd deliberately talk over other actors' lines or deliver his own lines late to mess up the timing. This made it hard for editors to use the footage, forcing the spotlight back on him in reshoots. Directors complained, but MGM backed him. He made money, so they looked the other way. His worst behavior was around child actors. Jackie Cooper, his young co-star in The Champ, later said Beery was cold and dismissive between takes. Cooper even said Beery made fun of him when he cried during emotional scenes. Margaret O'Brien, another child star, claimed she needed a chaperone to keep Beery in check during filming. It wasn't just kids. Adult co-stars found him mean and arrogant. He bullied directors, fought with producers, and even walked off set when things didn't go his way. Crew members said he'd yell at extras and treat makeup artists like servants. Then there's the story that never fully went away. In 1937, comedian Ted Healy got into a fight outside a nightclub and died from his injuries. Some reports said Wallace Beery was there that night. No charges were filed, and MGM may have helped cover it up by sending Beery out of the country for a while. Nothing was proven, but people whispered about it for years. Wallace Beery kept getting roles, but not because people liked him. It was because audiences paid to see him. Behind the scenes, though, he was one of the most hated men in the studio system. Loud, selfish, and totally untouchable. Errol Flynn. He looked like the perfect movie star, handsome, funny, and totally charming. In the late 1930s, he was everywhere. Captain Blood, Robin Hood, the Seahawk. He played the daring hero in every costume drama Warner Brothers could make, but off-camera, things were much messier. In 1942, Flynn was charged with assaulting 2 underage girls. It was one of the biggest scandals Hollywood had ever seen. The trial played out in public, with headlines splashed across every major paper. Flynn claimed the girls were lying. His lawyers painted him as the victim. In 1943, he was found not guilty. The jury believed him, or at least had doubts. But the damage was done. Even with the acquittal, people didn't forget. His name became linked to scandal. The phrase, "in like Flynn," started popping up, tied to his reputation for partying, womanizing, and living fast. On set, he was just as difficult. He showed up late, drank heavily, and didn't always learn his lines. Directors found him frustrating even when the camera loved him. He joked that he lived on champagne and adventure, but co-workers said he lived on ego and impulse. Even his friends admitted he could be reckless. He got into fights, ran up debts, and once trashed a hotel room so badly the studio had to pay off the damage. Warner Brothers stuck by him for years, but by the 1950s, his star power faded. The scandals, the chaos, the drinking, it all caught up. He died in 1959 at just 50 years old. At that point, the public had mixed feelings. Some remembered the charm. Others remembered the trial. Either way, Errol Flynn was no longer just a swashbuckling hero. He was the face of one of old Hollywood's darkest chapters. Charlie Chaplin. He was one of the most famous faces on Earth. His silent film character, the Tramp, made people laugh across countries and languages. He wasn't just a movie star, he was a symbol of early Hollywood. But by the late 1940s, Chaplin wasn't just making headlines for his films anymore. People started calling him un-American. Chaplin never became a U.S. citizen, even though he lived in the country for decades. That alone bothered some people. But what really sparked trouble were his politics. He spoke out against fascism, poverty, and war. He also supported causes that during the Cold War made people suspicious. Then came the scandal. In 1943, a young woman named Joan Barry claimed Chaplin was the father of her child. A court ordered a blood test. It showed he wasn't the father, but the judge still made Chaplin pay support. Public opinion started turning. Papers called him immoral. Politicians called him dangerous. By 1952, it got worse. While sailing to Europe for a film premiere, Chaplin was informed he wasn't welcome back. The U.S. government had revoked his re-entry permit. They never formally charged him with anything, but they didn't need to. Chaplin stayed in Switzerland and never lived in the U.S. again. His movies stopped getting shown as often. His name stirred controversy. To some, he was still a genius. To others, he was a problem that Hollywood didn't want to deal with. Chaplin's fall wasn't caused by one mistake. It was a mix of politics, fear, and timing. In the Red Scare era, even the world's most beloved clown couldn't avoid becoming a target. And in the eyes of many Americans, he went from icon to outcast, fast. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. They weren't just movie stars, they were two of the most powerful women in classic Hollywood, but instead of teaming up, they went to war. Their feud lasted for decades and got so nasty it became part of their brand. It started in the 1930s. Davis took her work seriously. She built her reputation on tough, dramatic roles. Crawford, on the other hand, leaned into glamour. She always looked perfect and played confident, stylish women. Davis thought Crawford was shallow. Crawford thought Davis was jealous. That's where the bad blood began. Things got worse in 1945. Davis fell for a co-star, Franchot Tone. Crawford married him. That move wasn't forgotten. Davis later said Crawford took him as revenge, not love. After that, the two avoided each other for nearly 20 years. Then came Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962. The film needed two aging stars with strong personalities. Davis and Crawford fit the bill, and hated every minute of it. On set, they pulled petty stunts constantly. Davis had a Coke machine delivered to annoy Crawford, who was tied to Pepsi. Crawford added weights to her costume so Davis would struggle in scenes that involved dragging her across the floor. The tension wasn't acting, it was real. The Oscar drama sealed their feud in Hollywood history. Davis got nominated for her role. Crawford didn't. So Crawford reached out to other nominees and offered to accept on their behalf. When one of them won, Crawford walked on stage and took the trophy, while Davis watched, stunned. The feud never ended. Even after Crawford died, Davis still had harsh things to say. She once said, "You should never say bad things about the dead. You should only say good. Joan Crawford is dead. Good." Most Hollywood rivalries fade out. This one burned hotter the older they got. The press ate it up, but everyone on set, they were stuck between two legends who couldn't stand the sight of each other. Marlon Brando versus Frank Sinatra. In 1955, Guys and Dolls brought together two very different stars, Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra. Fans expected box office gold. But on set, it was all eye rolls, silent jabs, and one of the pettiest feuds in Golden Age history. Brando came from the method acting school. He took his time with lines, rehearsed emotions, and believed in living the character. Sinatra thought that was a waste of everyone's time. He liked to show up, hit his mark, and get out. One-take Frank didn't want to wait around for someone to find their motivation. They hated each other's style. Sinatra reportedly called Brando a mumbler and accused him of slowing down production. Brando didn't hold back either. He called Sinatra baldy behind his back. The crew tried to keep them separated between takes. The tension came to a head during a scene where Sinatra had to eat cheesecake while Brando delivered a monologue. Brando flubbed his lines. Multiple times, Sinatra had to eat a fresh slice every take. By take 5 or 6, he was furious. He threw down his fork and said, "These amateurs are gonna kill me." The whole set went quiet. But it wasn't just about acting. At the time, Sinatra was still reeling from his split with Ava Gardner. Brando had reportedly dated her too. Whether or not that was true, Sinatra believed it, and it made every scene tenser. After the film wrapped, they never spoke again. Sinatra trashed Brando in interviews for years. Brando called Guys and Dolls one of his worst projects and swore off musicals entirely. The film was a hit. Critics were kind. Audiences loved it. But behind the scenes, it was two icons locked in a silent war. Brando represented the future of acting, raw, emotional, unpredictable. Sinatra stood for the polished old-school system. Neither would budge, and for everyone on set it was clear. The movie may have been fun, but the filming was anything but. Gene Kelly. He made everything look effortless. That bright smile, that sharp footwork. He became the face of Hollywood musicals. But behind the camera, Kelly was a completely different story. He was a perfectionist to the extreme, and working with him often came at a cost. Kelly didn't just choreograph dances, he controlled every frame. He'd rehearse scenes down to the tiniest detail, repeating takes until dancers were physically worn out. He didn't tolerate errors, improvisation, or anything less than what he envisioned. Co-stars described him as exacting. Crew members said he could be cold, he didn't hide his frustration, and he definitely didn't sugarcoat notes. Debbie Reynolds, who starred with him in Singin' in the Rain, later called filming one of the most painful experiences of her life. She wasn't a trained dancer when she got the part. Kelly knew that. Still, he pushed her relentlessly. Her feet bled from long rehearsals. One night, she crawled under a piano in tears. Fred Astaire found her there and offered to help her practice. Without him, she might not have finished the film. Kelly also clashed with Stanley Donen, his longtime collaborator. They co-directed hits like On the Town, but their partnership cracked during It's Always Fair Weather. Donen later said Kelly had become arrogant, moody, and impossible to work with. After that film, they never teamed up again. The reputation followed him. Even producers hesitated. Kelly wanted creative control over everything: lighting, editing, music. Some called it visionary. Others called it exhausting. Actors started to avoid him. Studios, once eager to please him, grew tired of the behind-the-scenes tension. As musicals began to fade in the late 50s and early 60s, so did Kelly's influence. His final projects didn't connect the same way. Younger performers weren't willing to put up with the same treatment. He's still remembered as one of the greatest dancers to ever grace the screen. But in Hollywood, a lot of people remember something else: the pressure, the criticism, and how working with Gene Kelly could go from inspiring to unbearable. Lionel Stander. He was a standout in 1930s films. He had a booming voice, a tough guy look, and sharp comedic timing, but he didn't play by Hollywood's rules, and that made him a target. During the 1940s, the House Un-American Activities Committee began cracking down on people in the film industry. They accused actors, writers, and directors of having ties to communism. Many gave names to save their careers. Stander didn't. When called to testify, he didn't hold back. He criticized the hearings and refused to cooperate. His testimony made headlines and got him blacklisted almost immediately. No studio would hire him. Producers called him dangerous. People who once worked with him stopped returning calls. For nearly a decade, Stander was pushed out of the business. He sold insurance. He took whatever voice work he could find. At one point, he worked under fake names just to stay afloat. But he never apologized and never changed his stance. In the 1960s, things slowly turned around. The blacklist began to fade, and Stander found work again, mostly in European films at first. In the late 70s, he landed a role in Heart to Heart, which gave him a new audience. But the damage from those earlier years never really went away. Inside the industry, some still viewed him as a troublemaker, not because of how he acted on screen, but because he refused to stay quiet when it counted. That made him both respected and feared. He wasn't hated by the public, but behind studio doors, Lionel Stander became a cautionary tale. Speak up and your career could disappear. William Desmond Taylor. He wasn't a household name like Chaplin or Fairbanks, but in early Hollywood he was a respected director. He made over 50 films in the silent era and worked with some of the biggest stars of the 1910s and 1920s. Then, in 1922, he was found dead in his Los Angeles bungalow, and no one's ever been able to give a straight answer about what happened. Taylor had been shot. That much was clear. But there were no signs of a break-in. Nothing was stolen. Police found letters, a large sum of cash, and some very nervous people in his life. The suspects? They were all part of the movie world. Actress Mabel Normand, one of Taylor's closest friends, had visited him just hours before. Actress Mary Miles Minter had once been romantically linked to him, and her mother reportedly hated the relationship. Some believed she was involved. Others suspected Normand's connection to illegal dealers had something to do with it. In the end, no one was charged. The media ran wild. People started calling Hollywood immoral. They said the industry was filled with illegal substances, affairs, and secrets. Studio executives panicked. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a PR disaster. The fallout helped push the industry toward self-censorship. They needed to clean up their image, fast. Taylor's death was never solved. But the silence from Hollywood wasn't just about protecting the investigation. It was about protecting reputations. People avoided the topic entirely. His name disappeared from film credits. His death became something no one wanted to touch. Inside the industry, Taylor's story turned into a cautionary tale. Not just about danger, but about how quickly people would turn their backs when the headlines got too hot. Clark Gable. He was called the King of Hollywood. With that crooked smile and booming voice, he defined movie stardom. But behind the scenes, Gable's personal life was tangled, messy, and often covered up by studio fixers. He was known for his on-screen charm, but off-screen, Gable had a reputation for being cold to co-stars and rough around the edges. He didn't enjoy rehearsals, he hated second takes, and if he didn't like someone, he didn't fake it. But the real drama was off camera. In the 1930s, while filming Call of the Wild, Gable had an affair with co-star Loretta Young. She got pregnant. At the time, that could have ended both of their careers. So the studio stepped in. Young disappeared for over a year and returned with an adopted baby, who was actually her biological daughter, with Gable. For years, it was one of Hollywood's most carefully kept secrets. Gable never acknowledged the child. Young never publicly named him as the father until decades later. Even as fans adored him, the truth was quietly hidden behind publicists and contracts. Gable also clashed with women he worked with. Claudette Colbert refused to work with him again after it happened one night. He was rumored to be demanding, dismissive, and uninterested in anyone's input but his own. Directors gave him space, co-stars gave him distance. He stayed a top-billed name for years, but inside the industry, not everyone was impressed. Some saw him as a studio product, propped up by image management and star-making machines. By the time Gable died in 1960, he was still a box office draw. But many in Hollywood knew that behind the royal nickname and fan devotion was a man with walls around him protected by contracts, secrets, and silence. He wasn't hated by the public, but inside the gates plenty of people had their reasons.